When I graduated college in 1999 with degrees in religion and Asian studies, little did I know that so much of my adult life would be spent speaking to psychologists about psychologists. And though as senior staff members of APA would gladly testify, I've done a lot of talking about psychologists. I've said little to nothing, as Stephen alluded to, about how I, this guy, came to be so involved in, actually up to my neck, really, in national debates about psychology and psychological ethics in national security settings. So today I'm going to take this opportunity with the added benefit of an hour and a half on the program. Just to be honest, I couldn't listen to myself think for an hour and a half, let alone talk for an hour and a half, so I'm going to try to keep this to about a half hour. But I want to tell you the story of how I came to be standing here in front of you today. And it's a story that has not really been publicly told at all. It's apt that I'd be telling this here for the first time, surrounded by the people I lived through the torture years, which are still ongoing, but through the years of the Bush torture program and the public response to it, the people that I went through that journey with are here today. Because really, to be candid, this is not a story about a me, per se. It's a story of how we became an us. And unlike so many stories from the torture years, this story is actually about hope. It's about hope in the face of fear. It's about asking hard questions instead of accepting easy answers. And ultimately, it's a story of transformative friendships. Friendships that have not only transfigured my life personally, but have already, in 4 years, affected the course of American history in the post 9/11 era, and the future of the profession of psychology itself. So this story really begins in Cambridge, Massachusetts in the spring of 2006. As Stephen said, I just returned to PHR, Physicians for Human Rights, where I'd worked from 1999 to 2002. And I had been with Oxfam America. And during my time in the field, I'd been in Afghanistan twice during the war. I'd been in Ethiopia and been involved on the ground in the Gambella massacre response on the Sudanese border. I'd been in the Middle East in the Iraq theater, and I've been in Sri Lanka for the tsunami and Mississippi for Katrina. And yeah, my work had been fulfilling and exciting, and I got to ride in a helicopter. But really, more than anything, it was heartbreaking. And it was heartbreaking work for a reason you wouldn't expect. And that reason was the pain of having a front row seat, frankly, overseas, to the decline of American credibility as a defender of universal human rights abroad. And though the invasion of Iraq had contributed mightily to the entropic state of America's moral might as of 2006, one word had put the U.S. in the doghouse of civilized nations more than any other, and that word is torture. I returned to PHR to attempt to do something, anything, out of desperation to help restore the legacy that began at Drake's Farm with General Washington, continued at Nuremberg with Justice Jackson, and as of 2006 lay in tatters after Abu Ghraib with President Bush. Under my colleague Paul Rockland, PHR had begun organizing psychologists in 2005 to oppose the APA's PENS report. And both everyone here who knows me has spent basically 4 years criticizing me for using acronyms too much. So today I'm going to try to avoid acronyms as much as possible. And what the PENS report is, as many of you know, is the President's Task Force on Psychological Ethics and National Security. It was ironically initially intended to use the language of Russ Newman himself, former director of clinical practice at the American Psychological Association, to basically put out the fires lit by reports of psychologists being party to detainee abuse at Guantanamo. As I said, ironically, it basically poured gasoline on the very flames that it was trying to put out. The first group of dissidents, some of whom are in this room, that PHR collaborated with to try to change APA policy, beginning in 2006, began with less than a dozen people. Most notably, Dr. Brad Olson and Dr. Jean Marie Arrigo, and I'll get to the Stevens in a bit. It would be easy to say now, 4 years later, and many victories later, it'd be easy to claim we were stalwart and an undaunted few, but brave band, marching arm in arm into the darkness of the unknown against a powerful and dastardly foe. It would be easy, and it would also be dead wrong. To put it bluntly, we didn't know what the hell we were doing. And more than anything, we didn't know what we had gotten ourselves into whatsoever. And I think for what happened later, as you'll bet to see, I owe the spouse or partner of everyone in this room who worked with me flowers every Valentine's Day for the rest of their lives. In the months prior to the August 2006 convention in New Orleans, Paul and I desperately sought out any individuals who had some semblance of a clue about why the APA would stray so far willingly from health professional accepted international health professional ethics and basically endorse the wholesale dismantlement of the core aspects of its ethics code for the sake of an easier time being clearly complicit with systematic physical and psychological torture, and thus enter the Stevens. Paul and I were watching some guy on Democracy Now! Who looked like Philip Glass ably debate Dr. Gerald Kuchar, and that guy was Stephen Reisner, and I turned to my colleague Paul and said, "This is just the right elitist Jewish liberal New Yorker we were looking for." and so it began. During that time, what we lacked everything of everything, but what we lacked two commodities more than anything in the campaign. We lacked psychologists who cared about the issue. Well, let me rephrase that. Psychologists who even knew about the issue, let alone cared about it. Once we started educating them, then we got into real trouble. And we also lacked actual information about the operations where we were criticizing. It's important to realize, as I said last year in an interview with Jane Mayer in the New Yorker, she asked me, well, what do you say when people say it's over now? The torture's over now. And I said to her then, well, what's over? What's over? How many people were actually in the system in terms of detainees in the DOD system? No one has that number. How many were in the CIA system? How many physicians? How many psychologists? What was the standard operating procedure for the use of pharmaceuticals in interrogation? What was the standard operating procedure for research? So we don't know. And if I was saying that in 2009, what's over? Think of